Hey, entrepreneurs, do you have a personal brand? That's what we talk about here with Danielle Francisco. He's been helping entrepreneurs position themselves as thought leaders in their field and scaling their message through digital PR for the last 6 years. He tells his story about having been laid off twice and building a company that helps others build their personal brand. On this podcast, you're going to learn about how to humanize a version of yourself, what the framework of a personal brand is, and how to add value. By the end of the podcast, if you're taking notes, you should also be able to take some notes on your own personal brand. You're also going to learn how you can market it through paid opportunities as well as earned opportunities.
Danielle, thanks for joining us on today's Entrepreneurs United podcast. Can't wait to learn more about how you view digital PR. And I know you also have a podcast, The Drive to Succeed. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and then dive deeper into some of these components you're an expert in.
Great. Well, awesome, John. Thank you so much for having me on your show, as well as Rich. So basically, I'm based in Dubai. I'm an expat here for almost 11 years now. Originally from events and publishing industry, and then been laid off twice. After that, I figured out, all right, no matter how long you work for a company and what kind of business you bring in, at the end of the day, you're just a number in a big old machine. So figure out, all right, better look for other alternative, and then start a side hustle, which eventually turned into a full-time gig. And here I am.
That is awesome. Well, I'd love to learn just a little bit more about that. So when you were in events and publishing, what exactly were you doing in those companies?
Yeah, so there are two things, right? Because here in Dubai, is basically we have, I think, 80 plus events or B2B events happening. So like, building trade show booth, publishing B2B magazines. Like if you're familiar with Entrepreneur Inc. and Forbes, kind of similar doing those kind of stuff. Originally, so basically my background was really strong on the project management side.
Okay.
With a bit of high ticket sales. So the idea behind that was that early on when I arrived in Dubai, because originally it was like only a 3-month short vacation, but then my dad told me, like, come here. When I come here, it's like, all right, this is the land of opportunity. So coming from the Philippines, like any other expat, I was so amazed. And then I said, all right, give me 2 years and I'm gonna go back and retire or something like that.
Yeah.
But then here I am, like 11 years as an expat. It's basically my second home. Then work my way up, building skill sets that are entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And then once I have enough set of skills, that's when I time, all right, build a side hustle. And then how can I jump from my 9 to 5 into building something more meaningful to me, not just more about making money, but really something that I'm passionate about. So
That's fantastic. Well, I appreciate you sharing. And at some point in this conversation, I want to learn more about the business climate in Dubai. At some
Sure.
point, I have a friend that lives there as well. I'd love to get your take on
Awesome.
it. But I want to come back to, you're in the events and publishing business. You're trying to earn a corporate career, right? In that industry, and things don't quite go so well. You realize, look, I'm just a number here. I don't control my own destiny. And you take this opportunity to start your side hustle. How long ago was that, Danielle?
So this was in 2015.
Okay.
So 6
So
years. Yeah.
So in 2015, you say, I'm going to start a side hustle. I'm assuming you've maintained a 9 to 5 job. That's why it's called a side hustle.
Yeah.
And you worked and you worked and you worked at that as your passion project of something you're passionate about, you knew you were really good at, and you wanted to turn into a full-time role. What was that side hustle and what has it become today?
Yeah, so basically I started my own agency. So it's basically a marketing agency and then transition into digital PR.
Okay.
So I know PR is a part of marketing, but the idea behind was that early on when I was working in a publishing industry, which is a good thing actually, because during back of those days, like my boss really encouraged me to start something, right? So we were very well, we were building this publication, company. He encouraged me, like, all right, so obviously at some point you're going to start on your own. This is one of the reasons why I joined the company, because it's very entrepreneurial. Like one of the founders came from IIR, which is like one of the biggest B2B event organization. The other one is from Finland, which basically more on the tech and startup side. So I said, all right, obviously you have the skill sets, you have the drive, you need to start something. So I started my agency on the evening. What I was doing, I was like sending a mass emails, and then during lunch, I was like cold calling. And while before I go from my office to at home, I basically like write down the top 10 people like I could call and have an appointment with. So those are the things that I started on, and transition by 2016 when I had enough clients to support my, obviously the living here in Dubai is very expensive.
Yeah.
That's the time, all right. So I think this is about time to go full time, and this is where I am today. So
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. I think a lot of people have a false impression that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to quit your 9 to 5 job and take all the risk to start something new and on your own. And that's very scary and daunting for people. And I think you're a really good example of, no, you don't have to do that. You can actually start with your passion, very small, but invest in it because you're passionate about it over time and build something that now you're in control of your own destiny, probably forever.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, in the past 6 years that I've been working as an entrepreneur. Actually, my wife joined me when we got married. But that's one topic that we can talk about later on.
Right.
So basically, for the past 6 years, there are times where like I doubted myself. Like even before I jumped by 9 to 5, there was like this check coming in every month, right? When you quit your job, basically you have nothing, and you got to support yourself for the next 6 years to 12 months to make sure that you don't, like, this is a decision you need to make, right? And
Yeah.
if you have a family to support, it's a big jump. And like I mentioned, like I always mention, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. It takes, I think, like not just more than passion, but really putting in the work that, all right, you got to make this happen. Otherwise, you just go back to the old 9 to 5. Well, there's nothing wrong in working actually, because, you develop new like skill sets that you can transition later on. So
Sure. Well, what you're talking about, and maybe it fits to the title of your podcast, the drive to succeed. You got to want it. Not only do you
yes.
need to be passionate about it, but you want it. And we've talked about this a few times on this podcast, where I believe where true success is a Venn diagram, right? It's a Venn diagram of what are you most passionate about, what can you be the best at, and what can you actually make money doing. If you can find where those three circles come together, that's what you should be doing. And it sounds like you've found that. When we talk about digital PR, I'm very
Hmm.
interested in that because we've had some guests. We've talked about digital marketing,
Hmm.
and it's maybe not too dissimilar. But I
Yeah.
also noticed that we have a mutual connection in
Hmm.
Cameron Harold, and we've had Cameron
Mm.
Harold on our podcast, and we know Cameron from way back in the day of College Pro Painters before he started 1-800 Got Junk. And when he
Hmm.
was on this conversation with us, well before digital PR existed,
Hmm.
he was able to get 1-800 Got Junk in every single newspaper, getting articles all over the place. And he really, I think he even has a book now, Rich, right? Called, Marketing on a Shoestring Budget or something, like PR on a Shoestring Budget or something like that. You may be able to remind me of the title. But talk to me a little bit more about why digital PR is important and how you think companies can properly deploy PR to grow their business.
So basically, because there are two types of PR, right? Paid and earned. So basically, especially right now, in terms of like reach, obviously most people think that, all right, if I wanted to like put my name out there, I wanted to be on magazines, TVs. All of those are good because you have like massive reach. But if you wanted to really have those conversations that opens up, relationships like this, I would always encourage people to come into other people's podcasts. And that one way to do that is to build a personal brand, because obviously, guests, or sorry, hosts or shows wouldn't just want to interview someone. They wanted to interview who can add value to their audience. And by helping entrepreneurs, or service-based business owners develop their own personal brand, so basically what you're trying to do is not just to cut the half of the sales process that they would need to undergo when meeting new clients, but they're also getting that a little push to shorten up the cycle in terms of like qualifying yourself whenever you're meeting someone. So because nowadays you can say anything online, but if other people say about you, it's much easier to convince them, right? And in PR, there are two things, right? There are times where people send out like mass press releases, mass pitches, and these things don't work. I do receive a lot on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But really works in digital PR is about building those relationships that, all right, maybe I've been in a guest in one of these shows or one of these platforms. Now I have a relationship with the reporter or with the journalist. Now I can just, pitch my client to them, like, all right, so this might be a good angle for you to talk about. Have them on your platform, whatever that is, magazine, TV, or podcast.
Thanks for that. I'm curious
Uh,
to dig in on the
sure.
paid versus earned. You have businesses who come to you who say, okay, Danielle, I want to do digital PR. You classified it as there's paid and there's earned. Can you give a sample of the value you would give a client of yours on what are the top few ways you recommend for your clients to get paid digital PR? And then what are the top few ways to get earned digital PR?
All right. So if you're starting out, one of the is because if you have funds, right? Obviously, the best or the fastest, easiest way to put your name out there is through paid medium. But obviously, there are already like there's some connotations that when you paid for something, because sometimes the platforms, even though someone paid for it, you actually consume it that it doesn't look like it's paid. You know what I mean? Especially like people who are not familiar with the media landscape. When you read something, all right, so this guy looks credible, this what he's doing, but you didn't know that he actually paid for it, no matter how big the amount is, right? This happens a lot, especially when someone's running for candidacy or whatever. It's always a little bit of mix and match with paid and earned. However, in earned, what you're actually doing is that you're getting published because you have the merit of being published. You have a story and angle that will add value to that platform's audience, right? So if nobody knows who you are, the best way, go on a paid, just to have like that a little bit boost. And then once you build the credibility, now you have something to say. You've been published in other publications. Now it's much more easier to get that earned. But the best way, really, like the long term sustainable, is to build a personal brand, because nowadays you spend, you invested, let's say, like, I don't know, like $1,000, for example, on a magazine, which circulates maybe once a month or once a week, and then it just reaches 10,000 people, and you don't know who those 10,000 people are. If you spend those 1,000 in an ad, now I'm talking about a little bit of digital marketing. But then again, if you're targeting that ad to those people who own these platforms, like shows that you have, or maybe I saw your face, right? I saw your story somewhere, but they don't know where it is exactly. But now you're having this recognition. They recognize your face, they recognize your story. Now it's much more easier to follow up, like, all right, I've been a fan of your show, I've been a fan of your platform. Here's my story, here's my bio. Can I add value to your audience? Perhaps like a 15-minute feature or something like that. So
Can you summarize for us what is the fundamental difference between marketing and digital PR?
So actually, PR is just a part of marketing. There's a big, it's like a big machine, right? Marketing, you have digital, you have traditional, like below the line, above the line, and PR, it just comes in a small part of that marketing. It always what do you call it? It's like interconnected at some point. But when it comes to PR, it's just about putting going into the reputation and where the conversation is going. Because in marketing, you are the one saying it. I think this is the more easier. When you're marketing, you are the one saying it. In PR, other people are saying it.
That makes sense. And you had said twice so far, you talked about the value of building your personal brand. That sounds
Mhm.
like something that is core to the advice that you give your clients. Can you expand
Yes.
on that for us?
Sure. So basically, reach the idea, reach, right? I pronounce it correct.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, awesome. All right, so basically, when most people think when you're building a brand, right? In the traditional days, you think of a logo, you think of a website, but when you're building a personal brand, you're basically humanizing a version of yourself. So gone are the days where you wanted to reach out with a company and you have this faceless voice that you don't know who you're really talking with. But now, like if you look on big companies, they tend to appoint either a spokesperson of the company, normally C levels, or they encourage their employees to have their own personal brands, which basically highlights themselves as an expert in their field.
What's the resistance? Well, let me rephrase that.
Go ahead.
Humanizing a version of yourself is about building your personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
Why do people not already do that? Is it because they didn't think of it? Or have they thought of it and they're resistant to it? Why is that not happening all over the place? Why do they need to work with you to come across that?
Yeah, because basically personal brand is one big chunk of personal branding is your message, right? Your personal story. Now the idea, some people, especially in people who are in the corporate environment, whenever a camera opens up or a journalist starting to write, suddenly their persona changes. And they either become this so stuck up, or they just said something that is already, they already recorded something like that, and they know everything to say, right? These are like the corporate messaging that works really well, especially in the corporate environment. But if you really wanted to like connect on a deep level with your target audience, with your prospects, with your customers, you got to really talk about not just about your business, talk about your values, talk about your beliefs, talk about things that you really deep care about is related to your industry, and that's how you basically add value and build your personal brand.
I'm very curious, Danielle.
Go ahead.
In your business experience, history, and looking at personal branding, who has done it best?
I'm
Very curious, because there's a lot of
yeah,
examples, right? But who
yeah,
would you use
sure.
as a role model of somebody who's done it best?
There's actually a lot, but because sometimes building a personal brand is sometimes it's not about the loudest, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I know. But one, I could only speak about people that I met. So Vaynerchuk, I met already like twice in an event. So I would say like he's one of the personification of who he is online, both online and offline. Several speakers that I know, because sometimes this is one of the things about personal branding, right? That I would like to say, when people go to online, because there are times when you're building a brand, it is backed by, because you wanted to make money, you wanted to be famous, you wanted to reach more people. Then if that is the intention of building your personal brand, that the messaging totally becomes different now, because if you're adding value because in hope that you get something in return.
Gotcha.
Right.
So, Gary Vaynerchuk used as an example, and I think what you said there, and you didn't say these exact words, but I kind of extrapolated it from what you said, is he's his true, authentic self.
Yes.
For example, I think a lot of people give Gary V a hard time because sometimes he curses too much. But he's like, that's me. So if you don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's who I am, and I'm not going to be not me to help you feel more comfortable. I'm me.
Yeah.
That's just one small example, obviously. But he, whether he's on stage, he's doing a podcast, he's talking to people, he is his true, authentic self at all times, and he's creating his message and his story, and boy, is he broadcasting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And it's actually a good disqualification process as well, because as you continue to build your brand, there's a saying, you attract the best, you disregard the rest, right? You're like a magnet.
Yeah.
Obviously you wanted to attract people who who share the same values, but at the same time, the reason why I mentioned authentic, because sometimes if you are like all into your own bubble, there are times where you become conceited, you have a big ego. It's always good to have those haters around you so that they can challenge you, like, all right, maybe am I really saying this because I stand by this message, or am I just saying this just to tickle the ears of people who are listening to me, what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Well, talk to us a little bit more about that because we've moved from digital PR. In my mind, I was
Yeah.
automatically thinking companies, and
Hmm.
you've taken us down another track, which is okay. There's also the individual and digital
Mhm.
PR. What do you work most with, companies or individuals in your firm?
So basically, individuals
Okay, interesting. And
who has
when
businesses. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and there's a very clouded, crowded space right now. Everybody
Mhm.
wants to have a podcast. Everybody wants to be communicating. Everybody wants to create their personal brand. I can remember it must have been early 2000s. There was a book called Brand You, and it talked
Mm.
about your personal brand and creating your personal brand. And to Rich's point, no one really listened then. Now it seems like everybody's listening, but they're not really sure what steps to take first.
Mhm.
What would you recommend if somebody's listening to this and you're like, look, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing this or that or the other thing. I'm not really sure, but I know my personal brand is important.
Mhm.
What kind of exact steps would you recommend people taking if they are starting on this journey of creating their personal brand?
Actually, like I mentioned, like one big chunk of it is their personal story to attract their audience.
Yep.
The easiest way is the framework. You know, to follow the framework: struggle, your story, and the solution. So number one, if you know what your audience or your customers are struggling with, what are the pain points, the problems they're trying to solve, what
Yep.
are desires, aspirations, basically create content based on that. Because now some people they have a problem, but they don't know what the problem is until you put it in front of them,
Yep.
right? You, as you build content, your job or your role is to basically put it in front of them, so that so it comes, rather than ignore it, it's becoming aware. And now that you got their attention, now it's a time to like share your story. Like, what do you have to offer them, right? What is the reason why I need, or why do they need to listen to you?
Hmm.
Right? And then based on that, because when you're sharing your story, what you're trying to do is not just to be this corporate stock up, like, all right, this is who I am, this is how great I am, but rather what I'm trying to say is that I'm just like you. This is the same struggles that I had, the same problems, and this is how I overcome it, right?
Hmm.
And the way I overcome it, I developed a solution, and this is the solution that I can offer you, right? If you think about, like, most businesses, basically, like, I don't know, Richard Branson or whatever, right? There are like some companies who have built a massive, businesses who actually started by single founders who develop a persona that attracted an audience, or like, their customer base, and
Yep.
eventually become bigger and, transcends whatever the brand is.
Like Richard
And
Branson as an example.
yeah, so Richard Branson is like like Virgin brand is an extension of his personality. So that's one good, case study. So
Yeah, that's interesting. So to recap, if I'm
mhm,
looking to start on this and I was working with you, you'd
mhm,
say, okay, first, John, we got to identify your story. And the framework of that story, if I captured this correctly,
yep,
was one, what is your audience struggling with? Two, identify the problem for them. So they understand, oh, yeah, I have that problem too, through potentially a story, I guess. And three, identify the solution for them through your version of your story and how you digested the problem and how you found ultimately the solution to that problem. Is that a fair one, two,
yes.
three, or is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, it's a fair one. So struggle, story, then solution. Because at the end of the day, you don't want just to build a brand, right? Because building a brand and building a business are totally different. So
Yep.
you wanted to convert, those audience they're following into either a prospect or a partner, or, a referral vendor, whatever, right? So that's why it's always something that you have something to offer. Because one of the challenges, especially entrepreneurs or individuals who have their own businesses, is that they're trying to communicate and talk with everybody, like, the spray and pray method, the
Yep.
throw the spaghetti and see what sticks in the wall. When what we're trying to do is, build a message that is, targeted to a specific person, right? This might be your, people call it avatar, people call it persona, right? And who is that person? Is, how can I make it attractive to this person to actually come into me rather than me chasing them, right?
I love
And
that. Yeah.
so that's basically like the core principle of building a personal brand. Now, the reason I said that is because it comes back again to when you're online. There are things where you say something where you don't really mean, or doesn't, you don't have like, the root to stand behind it. You just want to be famous, make money quickly, right? That's why personal branding has been like a snake. In the industry, they call it like the snake oil or something, because people want it, they don't know how to do it. So, someone who who knows how to do it basically charges, like, I don't know. But that's just me. So
Yeah.
it's really important to like stick to your values, and be really authentic. Like how how people perceive you online should be authentic. Like, you can say like 89% of who you are offline, because otherwise, it's not sustainable, and people find out, and it's just gonna bite you in the back or something. So,
Love it. Wow, there was a lot there in that last little segment here, talking about who is your avatar, buyer avatar, like who are you targeting specifically, right? But then also you said something that we've talked a lot about over the past year, which is targeting. The riches are in the niches. Like, don't be afraid to be hyper focused on where you want to be. As an example, Danielle, you didn't start a digital marketing company probably because you wanted to focus in on the PR segment and be really hyper targeted right here because that's where you're an expert, right? And so, having that, sticking to your values, knowing who you want to be, staying in that lane is very important. And then, Rich, what I really loved was how, and I don't know if you frame it this way, Danielle, yourself, but
sure.
struggle, story, solution. I mean, that's the three S's of how you have a framework for creating your story. And I thought that kind of came and flowed really nicely. I don't know if you call it the three S's or not, but Rich, I thought that was kind of a cool way to kind of sum it up.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from Danielle. Give us your personal story. Give us an example of that is true to you, that is your struggle, your story, and your solution, to give you an opportunity to both develop your personal brand with our listeners and give an
Mhm.
example of how you talk about personal brand.
All right, so I don't know how long we have, but so basically, what my story, my personal story was, it was like one of those defining moments, right? Before I started my own agency, like I mentioned, I was working for 3 years in this events company. It's basically like a husband and wife business. We grow it to 30 people. So basically, in number three, we go with 30 people. At the end of my third year, I got burned out and submitted my resignation. Like any other employee, I weigh in the pros and cons of like quitting this job. So I said, all right, I made up my mind. I need to learn something new. Otherwise, I'm just gonna be another employee going to another 5 or 7 or 10 year stint in this company. So I submitted my resignation. My boss back then didn't accept it. I said, all right, let me think about it. The next day, what he said, like, the HR called me, Daniel, you're fired. I was like 5 minutes, before I reached the office, and then I got the call. I was like sitting in a bench, and I was like, all right. So after working for 3 years, we're almost like a family here. This is how I'm gonna be treated. And the worst thing is, you need to leave Dubai tomorrow. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with any expat, like these procedures. But if you don't have visa, you're basically bye bye Dubai, right? So the next day, they gave me my passport. So basically, I need to book a flight. And then interestingly, I was playing in the church. I was playing guitar in the church, and then my one of my bandmates called me like, Daniel, where the hell are you? I said, I'm in Hong Kong. Well, what are you doing there? I just exited Dubai because I've been laid off, right? So I came back, and then like still shut off with a jet lag. I applied, and luckily, I got accepted in this publishing industry. So obviously, coming being that's my being laid off twice. Obviously, I told myself like, all right, this will be sustainable. This is one of the things that I always look for, like core guiding principles. If I wanted to do something, I'm gonna ask myself, what is the thing that I can do in the next 5 or 10 years that I will feel passionate about, that I will, be grow. I mean, will help me grow in terms of like my career, my life, my relationships. Then I said, all right, this is not sustainable because I've been laid off twice, and I hate the feeling. I hate someone, controlling or breathing down your neck, as they say, right? So while working, I started a side hustle, which we already talked about. And then by 2016, after 8 months of like doing, the marketing, sales and marketing, I jumped off completely. And then 3 years down the road, after working, I worked like big corporations with a shake here in Dubai, and then all those kind of stuff. There come to a point where I struggle with three things: money, marketing, and management. First of all, nobody talks about, like, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to think about cash flow. Nobody talks about that, because people would like only to see the Lamborghinis and the mansions, the Ferraris, right? But actually, it's more than that. So we're struggling with cash flow. Secondly, marketing. I was like always on the verge of me chasing clients. Like, you're only good as your last client, right? This is where I had an epiphany. All right, so if I'm always chasing these people, what is the best way for me to attract them instead of me chasing them? And that's where I figure out, all right, you can create content online, talk to their struggles, like we talked about earlier, and then connect with them with a story that would resonate, how I found a solution that can work with their struggles.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
We have a couple examples of, I think, PR, John, with our podcast. If you remember Keith Abelo, who was a guest, who put out a press release that said Keith Abelo was on Entrepreneurs United podcast, and it was paid for, but it looked like it may not be paid for. Diane Ploss, who was part of FranChoice, went on and gave us feedback on our podcast on Apple Podcasts. And she happened to mention in that I got on and talked about franchising. So it was a little bit of drawing it back to her. That was a free way to have a little bit. And that's not a knock on Diane. I think it was a very nice review. It also included that, what her profession was. A lot of our guests plug this podcast in there by themselves on LinkedIn. And that is a free way to get PR about what their story is. I'm curious to any other just kind of quick hits. Once our entrepreneurs who are listening get clear on their story, where are some quick hits on where they can use it that isn't just like the spray and pray? They're just going to sprinkle their story everywhere they go. Like, what are some quick hits where they can do it? Maybe even similar to some of the quick hits I just gave that some of our past guests have done.
Sure. So basically, because now we have, what your struggle is, what your story is, you have a solution, right? The second part is create either a speaker bio or, like a podcast guesting bio. Write down those 10 platforms that you want it to be in, and check out who are the audience that they're congregating within these platforms. It's either a podcast, a TV, or, who are their audience, and how can you add value and resonate your story with their audience with the struggles that their audience are struggling with. Because this is how you add your value and get earned media. Because you just don't want to go into a platform and promote yourself. Nobody wants that, right? Obviously you wanted to add value. So that's why by building a personal brand, you are well known for one thing and one thing only. And when people are getting known by who you are, what can you offer, it's much more easier to reach these platforms. Now, again, it can be a podcast, it can be, in LinkedIn. LinkedIn Live has, I don't know how many months is it now. So
thank you. I'm curious, in the struggle, you talked about the audience's struggle and tell a story that was relating. And then you tell the story, and then you get to the solution, and the solution is something you can offer them.
Yes.
At one time, John and I both worked in a digital media installation company that did it at mass scale. John is still involved with that company. John and I, when we were both working there, we would not have been able to tell a story about a struggle of ours with digital media installation, and then a story, and then a solution, and offer that. How does an entrepreneur like John, who has a digital media installation company that does it at mass scale, but that's not a struggle he's ever had, how does he get his personal brand as part of the story that attaches to a business that's not a solution he's personally needed? How does that work?
Yeah, so basically, so you have a digital. So if I got it right, you have a digital installation company, and you're trying to tell your story, which basically connects to your prospect or whatever that a prospective client. Is that what they hear?
Yes, as an example
All right.
of if John wanted to tell his personal story, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
his story, how does he relate that with a digital media company when
So
he hasn't had that need?
so when we're looking on a story part or story aspect, there's already three parts, right? The hero, you, the sage, someone who has already done it, and basically like a case study, like other people's story, right? So either you use your story or use your client's story. All right, so this so let me give you an example. So if you're going to use digital like installation company, all right, when you start, because obviously when you're starting, you're not selling a company, you're selling yourself first, right? Especially if it's like you're just starting out. All right, so in the past I had, my background is this. But one of my clients had a problem with digital installation, and they were looking for someone who can do it for them. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the market who can apply it, but when I met John, he doesn't know who to contact with. Fortunately, I'm someone who is very, expert in this field, area expertise. I have 10 years experience, and in my 10 years background, there's a lot of clients that I met with. People who have budget, people who don't have budget, people who are like picky, people who are not picky. But I figure out there's just one thing, right? You just need to deliver a solution that works for with your requirements. So this is one of the clients that I worked with in the past. This is struggle, and this is what we did with the struggle, and this is the solution. Now, this part, the solution, I don't know how much your budget is, or what are we talking about here, but is this something that you'd be interested in, so I can share more? So now you know what I mean. It's just like it's a sales process in a way, but you're not trying to like go in for the sale. You're trying to be relatable and trying to um let them think about things that they might not think about. It's like before the objections comes out, you're already addressing the objection through your story, because you know what they're already struggling with. It might not be your own struggle, but you have someone that you already solved a similar struggle with. So that's a good way to relate it to them.
Got it. So you're suggesting, hey, the story doesn't always have to be about you, your struggle, story, and solution. In that one, that would position kind of you as the
The
subject.
sage, yeah, the sage, the one on the top where you fix both, right? So it's like a triangle: the hero, the sage, and the other party. So
And on the case study side, it would be doing that, telling a struggle, a story, and a solution that a client had. What was the hero side? If you're the subject and the sage of the struggle, story, solution, who is the subject on the hero side?
so the hero side is your client.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it.
Yeah, versus you being the hero.
Yeah, exactly. Because now
You're not the hero, they're the hero. You're passing on your sage advice from your
yeah,
story.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So the
It's
sage is you. Like,
mhm,
I had the struggle, I made it through it. I'm the sage, follow me. The hero
yeah,
side is, hey, I know you have that struggle. I can help you with this solution that you can be a hero in getting that solution to solve that problem you have. And then case study is, let me tell you about a client of ours, that client's struggle, story, and solution. Yeah, that's great. And you called that a triangle?
yeah. So actually, because there's one framework that I'm working on, it's called Storytelling Secrets Success. The reason is triple S because it has that framework. But I'm trying to tie it up together, because the reason is like storytelling has been going on for so many years, but to make it work and be with like any other business, you need to make it replicable and like scalable, right? Because otherwise, like any message, you wanted to pass it on. So that's why I'm creating these frameworks. And it's basically, if I teach these people, it's much more easier for them to retain it, because they don't need to like to think about what the hell I said did the last 5-10 minutes. Just think about triple S, and it just sticks.
Yeah, yeah. So Danielle, I want to
Go
bring
ahead.
it all the way back earlier in our conversation and change directions just for a few minutes here.
No problem.
Talk to us about the business climate in Dubai. And you mentioned it's very expensive to live here. I have a really good friend of mine that lives in Dubai. Tell us a little bit more about how things are different there. You talked about obviously if you don't have a visa, it's
Yeah,
different.
yeah, yeah.
But how about just the business climate in general? How does things operate differently from what you're used to?
I believe in here because we have like 150 nationalities in Dubai. So in terms of like business alone, it can teach you a lot of things. Because and the good thing here is that I think the barrier to entry is much more lower compared to other countries. Because when you go to Dubai, you just don't you come here for a reason, right? You want to make money, and you want to make a living, right? So I think when it comes to business landscape, it's much more easier to enter the market as long as you have a solution that you can offer. And it also works in terms of like, because now you have 150 nationalities, you are more sensitive to talking to people, right? You know what things to say when you're speaking to a certain nationality. You know what things to not to say when you're speaking to a different nationality, and all ties down together, especially in a very small city, because the barrier to entry is small, but when you build a reputation, it's basically like you get referrals, you get recognition. It's much more easier, especially because we only have like I think 5 million people living here. So
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, definitely. If you want to be in the world of global business and you want to learn what global business is all about, it almost seems like the perfect destination where you can learn. Because I've always heard. I've never actually been to China myself, but I've heard, if you
yeah,
go to China, there's certain things you should do and say and act, and you can't have, red on the letters of your business card because that's evil. There's so many different things. Japan has their ways. I'm sure the Philippines has their ways. Europe has their ways. Canada and US have their ways, and to get all of that in one small little city and get to meet all those different nationalities and learn that must be an amazing experience. And I'm thoroughly impressed with your story and how you pivoted really your career, because I think we are living in the age of people wanting to be in control of their own destiny. And you can look at the youth coming up today, and examples like this of here's how you do it. You start your side hustle. You find your story, right, and do it like you is very impressive. So appreciate you sharing the story with us today. I want to
thank
end
you.
off with
Go.
your podcast. So you have a podcast, The Drive to Succeed. What is that
Mhm.
podcast really about, and why should the entrepreneurs listen to it?
All right, awesome. Well, like I mentioned, the reason why I started the podcast because back in 2019, I was looking for education. I was looking for mentors who can actually show me the way, right?
Mhm,
Because I always believe in, you gotta learn with someone who's already done it
mhm,
and failed at it and still recover from it. So I started the podcast, The Drive to Succeed, and back then, all right. So if I put myself in the people that I wanted to interview. What would be my main drive in succeeding, right?
yeah,
So for me, when I asked that question, all right, so most of my guests like ask me like, what's your main drive to succeed? Like for me, it's very simple. It's just that I wanted to build something that I can be proud of towards the next generation. So whatever message I shared, whatever business I built, either failed or succeeded on it, as long as I stay true to myself and my grandkids and the next generation after that said like, all right, Daniel built something, your grandpa did something that impacts at least one person,
yeah.
then I did my job. So,
Yeah, you're building your legacy. Love it, Danielle. Thank you very much for your time today and all your insights. Got a page full of notes here, and really enjoyed the conversation. Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode. Storytelling, secrets to success. From my relationship with you over 20 plus years, storytelling has always been a way that you articulate messages or train or teach. And this story kind of came all the way full circle, not just a storytelling, a message about a company, but your story. And I really loved the way that he gave us a framework that we can take away in the 3 S's of struggle, story, solution. I'm very curious as to how you found, his presentation and his framework relative to, things you've learned over the past few years.
I loved it. I like the idea of just building your personal brand and then attaching your personal brand with your company And then also, I really was curious, like, how do you do that if part of your story isn't that you need a solution, your clients do? And he gave good clarity on that too. At CertaPro, we had a keynote speaker in 2019 to our annual conference. His name was Troy Hazard. And I had the opportunity to go to lunch with him, and it was just one on one. And I asked him for some suggestions around how do you craft a keynote speech?
Yeah.
And, I could look up my notes at some point, but from what I remember from it, he talked about that he developed stories in what he called 7-minute frames.
Yeah.
And it was a very similar framework that it would be the struggle, the story, and then the solution. And he talked about it being an arc of the story and taking them through the arc, and then having a release of humor to be able to reset and then go to the next 7-minute frame, because if people would release or you would give them a pause or so there's definitely an art to it. And I would not say I am an expert at it. I'd love to get with Danielle and learn more about being able to craft stories and such.
Yeah. He's also, I think we learned, is coming out with an online course, maybe potentially a book in the future about storytelling and how that framework can work. Certainly, I find personally that I have stories. I've had struggles, certainly. I've had problems and struggles, and I've come up with solutions in some cases. In some cases, I didn't come up with a solution fast enough, so it had a massive impact. But I've always had a hard time personally getting the story in a package where I can articulate it clearly, concisely, accurately, just in a tight little package like you've articulated. And so I love the fact that you can put a framework individually and take your framework. And even if you're not trying to promote anything, Rich, just know what your personal story is and know what you represent. Because one of the things he talked about was stick with your values. Stick with, if you're going to be an expert in maybe starting your own business or even the business you're in today, you mentioned like digital media as an example. Even if you're going to be an expert in that business, you still have stories in that line of expertise that you have that you need to make sure you're able to articulate. Right. And when we used to grow up, doing business, conversation, business planning, the question always be, what's your elevator pitch?
Yeah.
Right. And I always had a hard time with that because you never get in an elevator and go, well, my business, creates semiconductors for, yeah, that sounds great, buddy. Like, see you later. Right. But if you were able to hit them with a quick story for 30 seconds that showed your relative expertise and you had that framed, you'll create attention. Oh, I want to learn more about that. You've always been great at helping people do that. And certainly what I love about Danielle is he's created a business doing that because he loved it so much.
Yeah, that is cool. I take your compliment of me having always been great, frankly, with an air of humility. I'm not sure I've always been great at it. I currently feel like I could do better at storytelling. And I bet a lot of our entrepreneurs who are listening could do better at it too. And storytelling, even with our employees, storytelling in the elevator, storytelling with our customers. And you talked about, the semiconductor. Too often, unless we're actually conscious about telling a story and having relief of a struggle or solving a problem, we just talk about the solution. And it's just, hey, we have the best what do? We have the best semiconductors. They're small and they're inexpensive and they're efficient and they last really long. And it's like, okay, that's great. Like, why would I need something small, efficient, inexpensive that lasts really long? Like, what's the problem it's trying to solve?
Yeah.
That's the story. And I feel like that's the genius of where Danielle was taking us, was start with the struggle, then go to the story, and then the solution.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever participated in a CEO roundtable, like an EO, entrepreneurs organization, or a Vistage group, where you have 8 or 10 CEOs around the table. And I had an opportunity to do that, probably 15 years ago. And the way they train you, when you come in and be part of EO, you become part of Vistage Group. They say every week, an entrepreneur or CEO is going to come to the table with a struggle they're having. okay? And their struggle could be whatever. It could be I'm having a trouble with an employee, or I'm having a situation with a vendor, or I'm having trouble leadership-wise myself. Whatever the problem is, doesn't matter. They're coming with a struggle. And the rule is that every CEO around the table has to provide a story back from experience as the sage, or someone else's experience that they know of as a sage, and present the case study of what they did in that particular situation. So as an example, you have a problem with an employee who's not performing, right? What I can't do is say, well, Rich, here's what you need to do. You need to write a performance review, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you do that, and that's going to work. Just go ahead and do that. Like, that's my advice. That's not allowed in those groups. What you are allowed to say is, Rich, I'm sorry you're dealing with that. I had a situation 2 years ago where an employee, and here's what I had to do to fix the problem, and I did this didn't work, but then I did this and this and this, and you tell the story and you share your relative experience. And if you don't have a relative experience, you should share a story of someone else you know that dealt with that and how they dealt with it in a story format. If they're doing that to train and help CEOs globally in these large organizations and telling stories, it's probably good enough for us when we're working with entrepreneurs and helping consult them on their business. What do you think about that methodology in terms of when you provide coaching feedback, or anybody provides coaching feedback, always doing it in that triangle of the sage, the hero, and the case study?
I love it. As a matter of fact, that's one of the ways that we facilitate our peer-to-peer sessions with our owners, is in a very similar format where they come and say, here's an issue that I'm having, here's all the background. Everybody then ultimately comes to giving a suggestion based on their experience. Sometimes it does get into, here's what I think you should do. And sometimes a timeout needs to be pulled. It's like, nah, don't prescribe a solution. Talk about your story that was similar in the solution that worked or didn't work for you. And it's certainly in that type of format. It's not time to be creative. Like, I've never tried this, but here's something I'm thinking of. Like, at that point, it's like, just pass if you don't have experience with it. So yeah, I love that format. And that format's very effective in peer-to-peer settings for us too.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I certainly, on a personal level, what I said in the conversation I meant, a lot of stories, a lot of learnings, a lot of struggles, a lot of solutions, and sometimes lack of solutions that I've learned over time. I'd love to take some of these trips, and certainly his online course or book if he comes out with it too, and I'm sure there's other products out there as well, to help redefine or define some of my stories more accurately for myself. Because once you're comfortable with the story and you can frame it, you're able to communicate it better.
I think there's a trip to Dubai in your future.
Love that.